Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived on my family's land for as long as I can remember. My great-grandfather bought this plot decades ago, and it's been passed down ever since. I love the peaceful atmosphere out here away from the city, with nothing but nature surrounding me. The only other building nearby is my neighbor John's house, about half a mile down an old dirt road. John and I have never been close, but we've coexisted without issues over the years, at least until recently, when he started claiming a large section of my property belonged to him. I have no idea why he suddenly decided this, but he became adamant that several acres of my southwest field were rightfully his. He even went as far as having a new property line drawn up by a surveyor, who I can only assume was a crooked friend willing to support John's absurd claim. Armed with this falsified survey, John proceeded to act as if this portion of my own land now belonged to him. He would constantly trespass, walking through my field and acting indignant when I told him to leave my property. No matter how many times I informed him his survey was inaccurate and illegal, he maintained his right to be there. The situation escalated one day when I was working on fixing some fencing along the field's edge. I could see John making his way towards me, stomping through the grass with a smug look on his face. "Morning, neighbor," he called out arrogantly. "Just coming to check on my field." I set my tools down and walked over to him. "John, we've been over this. This is my family's property, not yours. That survey you had done is fraudulent. You need to leave immediately." John scoffed. "I'll go wherever I damn well please. This land is mine now, you got that?" He then proceeded to get in my face, yelling threats and insults. I stood my ground, refusing to engage with his intimidation tactics. Eventually, he seemed to grow bored, shoving me backwards as he turned to walk away. "This isn't over," he spat over his shoulder. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers." I'd finally had enough of this harassment. The next day, I went to the county records office to have my property boundaries officially verified. Just as I knew, the documents clearly showed the field belonged to me and me alone. Armed with this proof, I headed to the sheriff's office and filed a report for John's repeated trespassing. The deputy sheriff agreed to speak with John, though he warned that not much could be done without evidence of the incidents. So I decided to set up some motion-activated cameras along the disputed area to capture John in the act. Sure enough, the cameras documented him casually strolling onto my property over the next several days, undeterred by the sheriff's warnings. I compiled the footage and returned to the sheriff's office, insisting they take action before things got out of hand. The deputy begrudgingly agreed to pay John another visit, this time with an official cease and desist order. But John remained defiant, stubbornly maintaining his right to access his field. A few days later, I awoke to a horrifying scene. John had knocked down the fence separating our properties and was working on erecting a new one, much farther into my field. Furious, I called the sheriff's office and ran outside to put a stop to this. By the time the deputy arrived, John and I were in a shouting match, bordering on physical violence. The deputy had to separate us, informing John he was under arrest for destruction of property and trespassing. John resisted arrest, screaming that I was the real criminal stealing his land. As the deputy tried to handcuff him, John became enraged and violently shoved me to the ground. He then launched himself at me, landing several punches before the stunned deputy could restrain him. I pressed charges against John for trespassing, destruction of property, and assault. Since it was all caught on camera, he had no defense. He was swiftly convicted and sentenced to 6 months in prison. I also sued him for damages and emotional distress, which finally convinced him to drop his bogus ownership claim once and for all. The judge ordered John to pay for the ruined fence and my medical bills from the attack. With that money, I had an even taller, sturdier fence erected between our properties. I also invested in an upgraded security system to keep watch if John ever tries anything again once released from prison. For now, though, I'm enjoying the peace and quiet without that entitled, delusional man constantly harassing me and trying to claim what isn't his. John thought he could bully me into giving up my own land, but instead he's the one sitting in a jail cell, learning a hard lesson about respecting property rights the hard way. Here's hoping once John finishes his sentence, he'll think twice before trying to pull this nonsense ever again. The next one is a pro-revenge story. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to 2 young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal, except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to COVID, and you were supposed to only have one fixed visitor over. But then again, to be young again, etc. So I didn't really care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I work with the mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantining or were effectively diagnosed with COVID. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spent about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired pretty much all the time. So I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party, but I'm pretty chill and know that living in the city, some noise is to be expected. So they are having their party, and I can stand some noise and music, but this party was wild. People shouting full on in the hallway, wrecking things, etc., etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbors and asked them when they could expect their company plus 20 people to leave, and if they could refrain from having a party the next day, as I have to work and get up at 6 every day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night. They didn't, and that they wouldn't have a party the next day. Plot twist, they did have another party. And then did another one the day after. At this point, I had been going a full 3 nights without sleep and was nearing neurosis. Every night I had talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place because it would be absolutely packed with people. And I work with some very vulnerable people at work, who I wouldn't want to spread COVID to. This was pre-tests, pre-vaccines, pre-much of the knowledge we now have about COVID. Luckily, the weekend came, and they went to their parents, and I could recover a bit. Suffice to say, I wasn't really liking my new neighbors. During the next few weeks, they refrained from big parties, but they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night. And by constant, I mean constant, like their bell would ring 70 times a night, and people would always be coming or going, and those people would be drunk and loud. Our communal hallway is pretty much an echo chamber because it's all stone, and any noise will travel throughout the building. Basically, I couldn't rely on sleeping at night. It drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday because then they would go off to their parents or whatever. I couldn't grasp how they could know this many people that would always be coming and going. During one night, while knocking on their door to complain about the noise, I encountered my upstairs neighbor, who is also on Reddit, hi, and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbor told me some important bit of information. The reason there were people coming and going all the time was that they used their apartment as a makeshift bar/hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID, and all those students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there, and that too was a secret hangout. So people would hang out at those 2 places and cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere or wanted to see their other friends, etc., etc. And the boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students or affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls, then we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to be quiet at 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us, as we were the pesky neighbors, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted that they didn't know what they were doing. So we started calling the police, dozens of times. Most of the time they weren't let in, and police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling as we wanted a record of our calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, police told us their hands were tied if they wouldn't open the door. When the police couldn't help, I turned to the next best thing. I'm a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help. This is what I did. Most places, student unions, police, town hall, were understanding, but couldn't really do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbor and contacted one of the girls' dean. I shot him a nice email about being sorry to have bothered him and taking up his time, but I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night. And maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed at that time. Especially since me and my neighbor were about to go to the papers with this story, as secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the papers at this point. This dean called me back right away, and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the law student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued, and we finally got to sit down with the girls, and they finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience, TBH. We learned that the police had actually been inside a few times, and they were issued tickets for having secret parties. Those were €300 each a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned they were not happy because the dean had called them up at 11 o'clock and they were still asleep, to which I said, "Well, there is your problem. You are still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that." So we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge and we got to vent, but we kept it kinda nice and parted on good terms, hoping that this would be it and we could live together as nice neighbors. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? You'd think they would have gotten the point now and would refrain from making noise and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically, what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly fewer people running to and fro, but the noise was still a problem, and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave. And these people were meeting up with big groups like crazy, while I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work, who were forbidden from even going to their own friggin' family. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbor happened to film such a party across the street and had sent the clip to me. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but weren't really sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddit of our country to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbor, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go up a step in the university hierarchy and contact the vice rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students, so quite high up. Things moved fast. Local news actually picked up our story from Reddit and contacted me, and we gave some background info. They confirmed with the police that cops had been dozens of times to our address and across the street and weren't let in most of the time. We mentioned that the university was involved, and that we hoped they would finally intervene. The next day, the piece was on their website. It went viral there and got promoted to the sites of most national newspapers. Its headline was sensational enough, mentioning the dozens of times police had showed up and also mentioning how healthcare workers were being kept up by selfish students. At the same time, the vice rector contacted us to take our statements, which we already had prepared on paper, and informed us they would investigate and could possibly start up disciplinary actions. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me throughout the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and link the university to the printed articles. The next day, while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbor that a film crew from the national news was at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same since this was getting pretty big now. But they made a segment anyway. And sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street, and a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door a dozen times, and the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. The best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in and said on camera exactly what we were accusing them of towards the university. That they had been having parties and didn't let the cops in, and that they had done it multiple times. No idea what made him think that was a good idea. Anyway, trying not to make a huge story even longer, the press died down sometime later, thank God, and the disciplinary action from the uni went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together, and we tried to make some amends. Because we put in a kinda good word for them, they got the lighter end of the stick, 40 hours of community service and some probation. The guys across the street got 80 hours each, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every time I got one. The sad part is, most of them sounded just like dumb young kids, but that was after getting called out on the news and being part of a disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes for some expected noises. But these people went to the extremes, and so we were forced to do the same. The rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noises we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learned that even very polite and chilled people can become very upset when presented with sleep deprivation and excessive noise. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened a few years ago. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, and I used to vacation in Asheville, booking cabins through a rental company. She grew up there and loved it. Plus, she had friends, family in the area that we would visit while there. One of the rules the company had was that no extra guests were allowed to stay overnight, or there would be a fee. This rule never bothered us, as we never planned on having that. But we did invite a couple of my girlfriend's friends over to hang out for a little while. They got there around 7, 8, and stayed until about 11 p.m. before heading home. We finished the trip, had a great time, and went home thinking all was good. A couple of days after we got home, I got an email from a woman in the rental company who claimed that their maintenance guy saw that we had people stay over, and we were being charged an extra $200 for breaking occupancy rules. Next came a back and forth between her and me where I told them no one stayed overnight, and that they left around 10:30 to 11 p.m. But she claimed to me that occupancy is anyone being in the cabin at all, which made no sense. I looked up the legal definition of occupancy, which did not side with her, but she told me it didn't matter, and they would charge me the extra $200. Cue the revenge. Between my girlfriend and me, we got about 8 people with 20 different Google accounts, all leaving 1-star reviews on the company's Google page. This took their rating of around 4.4 all the way down to the mid-3 stars. It was a local company. Well, someone higher up must have gotten wind of this and they knew exactly who did it. Within a couple of hours, I got several emails from the original woman and her supervisor apologizing for the misunderstanding and asking how they could get us to take down the bad reviews. After telling them it was clearly not a misunderstanding, I told them to kick rocks since they wanted to treat us that way, and long story shorter than it could be, we ended up getting an offer of $200 off our next visit if we took the reviews down. And they obviously refunded me that extra $200 plus another $100 off that stay. Karen, I hope you understand what occupancy means now if you still have a job. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I just remembered this old story of mine earlier today and thought it would be fun to share. I'm not 100% sure that this qualifies as malicious compliance since it wasn't intended to be at the time, but I'll let you readers be the judge. A long time ago, in the faraway year of 1999, I was a young 11-year-old boy finishing my last year of elementary school. Right before my birthday, which was in May, my parents called the family together for a meeting. They told us my mom had gotten a new job and we would need to move. We weren't moving too far away, only about an hour, but that still meant moving away from my friends and going to a completely different middle school than the one I thought I'd be going to. Elementary school wrapped up, and we moved to our new house in early July. In August, my parents and I got to take a tour of the school and meet the principal and some of the teachers. That was when we learned that there weren't any buses that passed our new neighborhood. It was actually close to the school, so that meant I would be walking to and from there every day. My parents weren't too thrilled about this, but it was only a 15-20 minute walk, and there was a path, so they came around to the idea pretty quickly. At the time, both of my parents worked full-time and 5 days a week. My mom worked Monday through Friday, and my dad worked Monday through Thursday and Saturday. Trust me, this is relevant. Since my older sister was away in college full-time, and they didn't trust me and my brother alone, my parents found a babysitter to be there when my brother and I would get home and watch us until my parents got home. My brother was 2 years younger than me and in the local elementary school. The school year started, and in early September, we got a massive heat wave that reached highs of like 96 degrees for a couple of days. The middle school was also an old building, and most of it was not air-conditioned. I only had 2 classes that had AC in the classroom throughout the day. At the end of those days, I was tired and not in any mood to walk an additional 20 minutes in the heat before getting home, so I used vending machine snack money to call the babysitter from the payphone. Cell phones were definitely not used by kids in those days. The babysitter, thinking he was just not letting me suffer in the heat, came to pick me up, and I would do some homework before Batman Beyond and Pokemon came on. I did try to call home 2 more times over the next 2 weeks when it was hot. The second time, I got the sitter again. The third time I called was on a Friday. My dad answered. He was not happy with me. He told me it wasn't that hot, 85 that day, and that I shouldn't call the sitter away from the house and that I had to start growing up. He told me to walk home, and we would talk more when I got there. So I walked home. I got a lecture and was told not to call the sitter again to be picked up. I said okay and told him I wouldn't call the sitter or him again to be picked up. 2 weeks later, at the end of September, a hurricane passed through the area. Halfway through the day at school, it really started coming down. Got so bad that they let us out of school a half hour early, like that was gonna save us. By this time, though, a lot of roads were flooding, and the line for payphones was long. I remembered what my dad told me a couple of weeks ago, so I walked home. It took me almost 30 minutes to walk home from school that day, and I was drenched by the time I got home. The rain was coming down so hard I couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of me. The roads were so flooded that the only way to drive in was with a car that had 4WD. When I got home, both my parents, Mom got out of work early due to the storm, were there panicking because they hadn't heard from either the school or me. I just walked in through our garage soaking wet and said, "Hi Mom, hi Dad, I'm home." After they got over the initial shock and relief of seeing me home, my parents and I had this conversation. Mom: "How did you get home?" Me: "I walked." Mom: "Why?" Me: "Dad told me to." Mom: "When? We didn't get any calls from you or the school today." Me: "Well, a couple of weeks ago I called the sitter a few times and asked for a ride home since it was hot. The last time I called, I got Dad. He told me I had to just walk home from now on and not call for a ride again." Dad: "I implied that there could be exceptions." Me: "You didn't say that. My mom turned on my dad and just told me to dry myself off and put my wet clothes in the dryer. I was drying myself off and I could hear them arguing. It was louder than the rain. When I was done and put my clothes in the dryer, my parents talked to me and told me I was allowed to call home but only for emergencies. The next day, Saturday, my dad took me out to Blockbuster and I was told I could rent up to 5 movies for myself. He also paid for pizza that night, and I got a whole pepperoni pizza for myself. That pizza lasted 2 days, and no one else was allowed to touch it. My dad never lived that down. Good times. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.